The UN's top official in Sudan says the country's warring generals have agreed to send representatives to negotiations. Volker Perthes said the talks could be held in Saudi Arabia and would focus first on establishing a durable truce. Clashes are still being reported in the capital, Khartoum, despite an agreement between rival military forces to extend a ceasefire.
Smoke rises over Khartoum on Monday evening. Yet another ceasefire apparently broken. The first international shipment of humanitarian aid arrived in Sudan at the weekend. But Kenya's President William Ruto said his neighbour needs more support.
But the same way we managed to evacuate people from the theatre, I think there is a way we can access that theatre with humanitarian support.
The streets of the capital are largely deserted. Shops and banks remain shuttered, and access to medical care becoming ever more difficult.
Many working and trained minds in the healthcare sector are fleeing Sudan. There is a withdrawal of many NGOs and non-NGOs due to direct attacks. By all means, it's a disaster.
Nationals from 12 countries arrived on the ship to Saudi Arabia. They were greeted by medical staff and local officials, as well as representatives from foreign embassies. But for many, leaving by air or sea is not an option. These families fled over Sudan's western border on donkeys, arriving in Chad after days of travelling. Emergency workers had a stark warning about the potential looming crisis.
If we fail to act now, it will be too late. The rainy season is coming in few weeks, and if we don't provide any assistance to the people, the road will be blocked and all the refugees here will be stuck.
The United Nations warns a number fleeing Sudan could soon surpass 800,000, and the conflict could destabilize the region. For the thousands that have already left, the violence may be behind them, but the multiple challenges facing the displaced still lie ahead.
I'm joined now by Mat Nashed, a Canadian journalist in Cairo. Matt, the UN's top official in Sudan warns that the country's warring generals, have agreed to send delegates to negotiations. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very optimistic. Again, I think it's always important to judge what these generals do as opposed to what they say. Delegates may be sent accordingly, but how serious will they be engaged in negotiating? Doesn't look very serious when neither of these generals can hold a ceasefire. My worry is that we continue to applaud the generals for purely what they say and their messaging and their optics, and not actually for engaging ongoing and brutal armed conflict in the country. And that was indicative when Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State of the U.S., just maybe a couple of days ago applauded a ceasefire between Hemeti on the paramilitary side and Burhan on the military side, when in fact people on the ground were very clearly using video and photos to demonstrate that actually there was really no ceasefire at all.
Indeed, the conflict is ongoing. The UN warns that the conflict could force more than 800,000 people to flee Sudan. Are neighbouring countries like Egypt, where you are, equipped to handle that?
I mean, they can be, but I think it's a political choice not to be. So Egypt is going at this alone, really consolidating control over the response on the border. They see it foremost as a national security issue. And as a result of that, there hasn't been a lot of neither reporters, aid organizations, international relief that has been able to really try to fill that void and assist people. So there certainly is a crisis brewing on the border. People are waiting for 6 days, little water, little food. People are passing away, even from what I'm hearing. It's incredibly difficult. But I think it's also very much important to note that the difficulties on these borders, and not just in Egypt, but I would say throughout the region, is also somewhat of a result of increasing border security and border regulations that have are directly related to a lot of relationships and migration cooperation between these countries and Europe as well. And so moments in the past and past eras, borders were significantly more fluid in these regions, and now we're seeing them considerably more restricted. That is not all having to do with migration cooperation, but certainly is an important part of the story.
Okay, Sudan is a huge country with it borders 7 other countries there. What impact, though, is this conflict having on the humanitarian situation inside Sudan? And is the international community doing enough to help with that?
Short answer, no. They're not doing enough at all. In fact, after 2 weeks of the conflict, in which, just as you mentioned, about 800,000 people are being forced to flee to other countries. But, obviously that number is equally significant, perhaps more within Sudan, right, of people that are being internally displaced or not being able to leave their homes. And what we're seeing is just the World Food Program finally deciding to resume its operations. Obviously there was they had an issue with unfortunately a couple of its employees, or 3 of its employees, died early on, but they completely halted services and provisions after that. And a number of other NGOs, INGOs, international relief organizations, had been scaling back emergency response at a point when actually emergency response during armed conflict should be, by all indicators and all other scenarios, scaled up. So we have hardly seen any relief, and it's been completely this whole burden placed on civilians and their own networks in Sudan in order to aid their own people.
Matt, thank you very much. That was journalist Mat Nashed in Cairo.
Thank you very much.